Hi people of the internet and welcome to this new video by the Random Natura. Today I have a pretty controversial take about the methodology of philosophy compared to the one of history of philosophy, and I just wanted to share some thoughts with you because that's what we do on this channel apparently. So, in a nutshell, I've seen something pretty weird when we do philosophy. One of the first things you gotta get used to when approaching philosophy is the fact that you do it based on what people before you did, which isn't really all that weird. Like, one of the main points I bring forward on this channel is that our distinction about philosophy and science doesn't make as much sense as we think it does, which doesn't mean that that's arbitrary. The distinction between a positive science like physics and metaphysics, ontology, that kind of thing is there, but the world shouldn't be considered too fundamental because then we get into problems, which is what the work of Husserl is about, for example. Now, so one of the first things, and so from this, since when you do physics, you do not invent everything by yourself. You really need what people before you made. Like, you need Newton's formulas, Einstein's formulas, Planck's formulas. Without them you're going nowhere. The same is true for philosophy. So if you want to do philosophy, you have to study history of philosophy first. So the separation between history of philosophy and philosophy, which is very clear, sometimes blurs a little bit because to do philosophy you have to do history of philosophy, and so sometimes people just forget to make this type of actually going to do philosophy. And that's super sad. Sometimes in school, for example, when you study philosophy, it's super easy to have the impression you're really just studying other philosophers and you're never actually doing philosophy on its own, which doesn't, it's not doing philosophy on its own apart from studying philosophers. It isn't really just making your own doctrine. That's not something everyone does. Most people who do philosophy do not make their own philosophical construct, their own philosophical theory totally originally and from scratch. But to do philosophy in lieu of just history of philosophy, the only thing you actually have to do is to have an interpretation of other philosophers, which is original, which is your own, which can be inspired by other interpretations, but like it can't be exactly identical to every other interpretation because that's not how reading philosophers work. And you have to have an opinion, which the term opinion isn't, the term opinion shouldn't really be used there, but that's another story. But let's just use it because I don't want to mess things up too much. You have an opinion about who's right and who's wrong. Like, to do philosophy is to read Voltaire and say Voltaire is bullshit, he's totally wrong about everything, and this is why. That's doing philosophy. You don't need anything else. Doing history of philosophy is reading Voltaire and saying, yeah, this sounds like bullshit to me, but actually for him it wasn't, and those are the reasons why he thought that. If you do philosophy, you know that too. You know why he thought that, but you still think it's bullshit because that's Voltaire. Everyone thinks that's bullshit. So this is the difference, right? The difference between doing philosophy and doing history of philosophy is that if you do history of philosophy and something doesn't match the way you think about the world, you think, oh yeah, but this is cultural, and you understand why, where, what cultural elements provoke this. If you do philosophy, you do this, you understand what cultural elements, this weird things come from, but you do not avoid saying, yeah, that's wrong. And this makes super dangerous to abuse context, which is what the title of this video comes from. Context is overrated. Because as I said, what I hate is when people do history of philosophy and then forget to actually do philosophy and then do not do philosophy. For example, I'll give you an example, okay? Let's assume you are talking about Aristotle, for example, right? And you have in front of you the idea of time Aristotle had, the way he thought about time. If you are an historian, like someone who studies history of philosophy, you're going to say, yeah, this makes perfect sense. Because, and you're going to list etymological stuff around the word time in Greek, which is chronos, and analyze why Aristotle had to think that. Like, you're going to analyze why Aristotle thought that, not from Aristotle's perspective, but culturally, anthropologically. Okay? I think you got my point. If you're a philosopher, you have to do this. You can't avoid doing that because you must do that to understand Aristotle. You cannot understand a philosopher without context. Context is overrated, as I said in the title of this video, but it is not like not needed. You need context. So you need that work around the word chronos in Greek to actually understand what Aristotle is saying, just to understand like what he meant with the word time, because like reading philosophy is tricky because they use words pretty weirdly. Like good philosophers, I'm not looking at you, but are like use words consistently, but the fact that one philosopher uses the same word always in the same way doesn't mean that all philosophers use that word that way. So understanding what a specific word means in a certain philosopher is crucial. That's something you need to know to do to read the philosopher. If you don't, you can't open the book and read it. Therefore, that's super important. The history of philosophy is super important, and context is crucial. You can do nothing without it. Which doesn't mean it's not overrated though, because it is. It is overrated because people usually stop there, and that's something I hate. I hate people who just like do this context analysis and everything and then stop there. If you are telling me the whole thing about time in Greek culture to justify why Aristotle stole that, that's great. I need it. Thanks for telling me that, but that's not enough. I also want a philosophical explanation that transcends this. I also want to know why Aristotle stole that without taking context into account, which doesn't mean I'm not gonna take context into account. I want to be able to make sense of his thesis without thinking about the context, because I need to do that not for history of philosophy. It's not needed to do history of philosophy. I need to do that to actually do philosophy, because if the only way Aristotle could justify his conception of time was through everyone thinks that, which is basically taking context into account, I can't take that thesis and do anything with that, because that's a thesis without an argument, because context is not an argument. So, wrap things up. I know this is a pretty brief video, but I just wanted to make this point that's not related to anything more complex. It's just really about context. Like, context is overrated. Why is context overrated? Context is overrated because explanations of theories of philosophers due to context are considered the arriving point, are considered enough to answer the question, why is it like this for this philosopher? Which is wrong. That might be enough for an historian of philosophy, but that's not enough for a philosopher. Because a philosopher studies other philosophers only and only for taking their philosophies and applying them in his own quote-unquote doctrine. And to do that, he needs an explanation which transcends context, which doesn't mean he can avoid using context. He needs that to understand the thesis. But once the thesis and the philosopher are understood, finding an argument in that philosopher that transcends context is important, because if that cannot be found, and sometimes that happens, and yes, I'm talking to you, Voltaire, right now, in that case, that thesis is to be thrown into the bin unless you can come up with an argument for that, but at that point you might as well just start over, right? And this was our video for today. By the way, I'm not sure, pretty brief, just wanted to make this point. If you agree with me, write a comment, subscribe, like, just to tell me how good I am. If you disagree with me, write a comment still, because I'm gonna explain to you why I am right and you are wrong, and then you'll subscribe because you love me. Just let me think that's true. See you next time. This was Naturia. Bye.